Story 1: Robert Duvall. I was working on the abstract for a documentary that never went anywhere. One of the things we needed to do was tape a short interview with Robert Duvall, a friend of the documentary's subject. As the writer and interviewer on the documentary, I was going to be the one talking to him. We arrived around 11 a.m. to set up in a horse barn he converted into a large entertainment area. The interview was set for 1 p.m., and he and his wife arrived on time. I was nervous about interviewing one of the greatest American actors ever, but he was so kind and gracious that I almost immediately relaxed. While we were lighting him, he asked how the project was going, where we were from, and asked to take a brief look at the 3-minute abstract for the script. He asked that I call him Bob, and I replied, "Okay, Mr. Duvall." His answers were good, warm, and humorous. When he asked who the narrator for the abstract script would be, I told him I was still looking for someone. He said, "Well, why don't I give it a try?" 3 minutes later, he almost totally nailed it. He asked, "How is that?" I said, "Almost perfect. Could I get you to reread one paragraph?" Stepping on these words I underlined. He replied, "Oh, sure. It's a pretty good script." As he cut in those lines, I thought to myself, "Dear God, I just directed Robert Duvall." We finished in 30 minutes. After we thanked him profusely and started breaking set while cracking jokes, he said, "Why don't you boys come up to the house and have coffee with me?" For the next 3 hours, we sat in his kitchen, drank coffee, and talked about everything from barbecue to college football. He and I agreed that Clemson was going to win it all that year. We were right. We also talked about Stonewall Jackson's Shenandoah Valley campaign and what it was like to film The Godfather. Although, I will say, we carefully avoided talking about the movie business in case he just wanted a normal conversation. We worried that we were overstaying our welcome, but he insisted we stay. Finally, because we had a long drive home, we declined to stay longer. Before we left, he gave us a tour of his study. I got to read a letter from Marlon Brando after the filming of Apocalypse Now and held his Oscar. Then he followed us out into the driveway and talked some more. As we pulled away, the sound technician said it best. I get the feeling that if there had been a game on, he would have ordered a pizza and asked us to watch it with him. Just an incredibly nice and gracious man. Story 2. My mom and I saw Kiefer Sutherland in a cigarette store. She said, "You look like Kiefer Sutherland." He said, "I am Kiefer Sutherland." Story 3. The week I moved to Minnesota, I met Bill Murray at a St. Paul Saints game. I was 15, either 2009 or 2010. I can't remember which. I went up and asked him what he was doing. He said, "Trying to watch a baseball game," and laughed. He asked where I was from, and I told him McAllen, Texas. He said, "Oh, I think I had a margarita down there once." Overall, it was a very cool interaction, and I have a picture with him. Story 4. Robin Williams was absolutely lovely, but his manager was unpleasant. George Michael gave me and my then-girlfriend a lift home from his parents' restaurant. Story 5. At about 6 or 7 years old, I got to go on stage to give Dolly Parton a rose during a bluegrass festival. She is awesome, and I was truly in awe. Story 6. Jack Black. Met him in a hotel bar in Seattle in 2007. I did not know who he was until he left. We sat and had drinks for over an hour. He said he was a musician and was in town to play a show. That was as far as we went into who he was. He picked up the tab. The bartender asked me afterward, "You were friends with Jack Black? That is very cool." I had to ask him who Jack Black was. Story 7. I have met a lot of famous people, but the best was Fred Rogers. He was a regular customer of mine at a restaurant on Nantucket. Super chill, just like his television persona. We actually became friends over the years. The last time I saw him was at his family retirement party. He came into the restaurant where I was working and specifically asked for me. It was a great honor. Story 8. Jimmy Carter. It was at one of his book signings back in the late 1990s and early 2000s. I was 7 or 8 years old, and he waved to me and said, "Hi, pretty girl." Story 9. The most famous person I ever met was David Bowie in 2005 while I was still actively working as a chef. The Bowie family came for a quick getaway. I served as their private chef for several days. I had the opportunity to meet him and have several conversations. He was one of the most down-to-earth people I have met, very nice and a true gentleman. He was called back to London 3 days into their stay for business. Story 10. I walked into my office once and Carol Burnett was sitting at my desk using my phone. She mouthed an apology while I backed out to give her privacy. A few minutes later, she emerged and apologized sweetly again, saying that someone told her she could use it. She then stood in the hallway chatting with me for a few minutes as starstruck staff gathered around. An older lady from my office mortified me by asking her to pull her ear. She did while making a goofy face and was a total sweetheart to all. Goddamn American treasure. Story 11. I sat next to Joseph Gordon-Levitt on a flight from Albuquerque to Phoenix this month. I recognized him at the gate, and it seemed like no one else knew him. We boarded, and once we settled, I was even more shocked that he was sitting next to me. I played it cool and just said I was a big fan. He seemed delighted by the comment. My only claim to fame, and it was a cool one. Story 12. George Foreman and I met in the emergency room when I was a small child, after his fight with Axel Schultz in April 1995. Foreman needed stitches, and I was very sick with a high fever. I do not remember the interaction well, and my parents had to tell me about it. He was very concerned about how sick I was in an empathetic way. I was quite delirious. Story 13. I saw Bob Saget once when I was a kid. We both did a double take, and I took his to mean that he wondered if I was going to approach him. I did not, though. Rest in peace. Story 14. When I was 17, I met Pharrell Williams at Wimbledon. He was standing outside the press box alone, and I went up to him and said, "Well, Pharrell, what are you doing here? You just here for the fun?" In my strong Belfast accent. He looked so confused. He thought I meant crack, the drug. Story 15. Christopher Lee. More than 20 years ago, I was just putting a microphone on him. There were issues, so he said something about machines never wanting to cooperate. He told me I was tall and joked that he could not stand tall men. He obviously noticed that I was not a native English speaker because he asked me where I was from. When I said I was Czech, he thanked me in Czech. He was lovely. Story 16. I guess he is not very famous, but I would choose Richard Blade. It was a book signing, and he engaged in genuine one-on-one conversations with everyone. He and I talked about the Pet Shop Boys. Story 17. Robert Plant is a total sweetheart who had about 30-minute conversations with me and all my coworkers when he stayed at our hotel. He then took us all out for drinks. I am a huge fan of his, but by the time he checked out, I was less starstruck and more just wishing I could be casual friends with him and have more conversations. In this job, meeting celebrities, whether musicians, actors, athletes, or politicians, is a weekly occurrence. But he remains the biggest standout that I remember most fondly. Story 18. I met Stephen King outside a public store in Sarasota in the 1990s. I could tell he was in a hurry and did not really want to talk, but I did get him to sign my Tampa Bay Rays hat, which made him chuckle. He said he was not sure he should be doing this because he was a Red Sox fan. He was pretty cool about it, though. Story 19. Trent Reznor meet and greet before a show. I made him laugh. The person ahead of me was very excited, gushing about how talented he is and everything he has done for music. Trent looked a little uncomfortable. When it was my turn, I shook his hand, thanked him for taking the time to talk to us, and asked a few questions about the stage production. Just before I left, I gestured towards the excited fan and said, "Oh yeah." All that he said too. Trent let out a hearty chuckle. I was proud. Story 20. My son and I met Henry Winkler. We were at a convention behind some people and didn't realize we were in line for his booth until we got close. My son had read his books and I knew he was the Fonz, but this was before I watched Barry, I think. He was very nice, talked to my son about his books, and signed one for him. I couldn't decide if he is more famous than New Kids on the Block, whom I have met numerous times, all between 2008 and now, not back in the day. They have varying levels of conversational skills, but are all nice guys. Story 21. Bradley Cooper was buying a Ducati from my dealership at the time and wanted it delivered. I asked him about The Hangover Part 3, and he said it was going to be the best one yet. I then delivered his motorcycle the next day and had to drop it off at the curb with his assistants. Story 22. Matt Damon, the Dalai Lama, Carlos Santana. All three were lovely humans. Edit. Kate Beckinsale as well. Her beauty distracted me, and I do not remember much. Story 23. Steve Jobs sat down in front of me at a meeting we were attending. He turned around, extended his hand, and said, "Hi, I'm Steve." It was my first day of work at his company. He was always warm and friendly to me. Story 24. Vincent Price, one of the loveliest people alive. Dustin Hoffman, snobby and dismissive. Dustin's parents, cutest couple ever in kind. Shaquille O'Neal, coolest guy. Story 25. This was before she became as famous as she is now, during her Nickelodeon days. I had met a good number of National Football League players too. I was at Disneyland on the Haunted Mansion ride, and she was allowed special entry directly into the main room ahead of the line. No one really recognized her or made a big deal of it, but one little girl recognized her and was clearly afraid of the ride. Ariana Grande was very sweet to her. This gave me a high opinion of her, since no one was really watching and she had no reason to be kind. After the ride, she bumped into me and apologized. Story 26. It was not really a proper meeting, but I saw Keith Chegwin running inside a human hamster ball down Stockton-on-Tees High Street. Story 27. I cried to my wife after meeting Jean-Claude Van Damme, who is my childhood hero. He was really nice. I was petrified he was going to be rude because, like I said, he was my hero. Ricky Gervais was really friendly and also hugged me and my wife for photos. He was very kind. Carl Pilkington is exactly the same as he appears on Everything You See. Dolph Lundgren was absolutely awesome. People kept shouting, "Ivan Drago," and he ignored them because he was tired of hearing it. I shouted, "Sergeant Andrew Scott." He stopped, looked, pointed at me and said, "That's the Spirit Soldier," which is a line from Universal Soldier. He came over, shook my hand, signed autographs, chatted, and took pictures with me while everyone else was confused as to why he ignored them. Zachary Levi is exactly how he is in Chuck. Smiley, friendly, and really nice. Jason Statham was unpleasant. He was annoyed because I had personal items for Van Damme and Dolph to sign, but for him, I only had a notebook. He gave me a bad attitude. I have met many UFC fighters. The most memorable was Michael Bisping, one of my favorites. A friend and I traveled to Manchester hoping to sell some tickets but couldn't. All hotels were sold out except the most expensive one. We shared a room. I was sitting in the lounge area talking in depth about UFC with someone who really knew his stuff, and so did I. We spoke for ages. He asked why I wasn't going to the event. I told him tickets were sold out and that we traveled to sell some but couldn't. I said I was gutted because Bisping was defending the title against Dan Henderson. He shook my hand and left. While I was outside having a vape, Dana White walked out. I was amazed. We had a chat and a picture. He was nice. Then the guy I was talking to before called me over and asked if I still wanted tickets. He said his friend might have some for sale. I said yes and asked how much. He told me to come with him and we would sort it out. I got in the elevator and followed him to his hotel room. He unlocked the door, and there were a lot of guys sitting on the couches wearing UFC merchandise. There were foam pads on the floor. Then I heard, "Someone wants to buy my tickets, do they?" I realized I was in Michael Bisping's hotel room. He gave us both free tickets to sit with his family, and it was incredible. We actually went viral with the video his team recorded. You can probably find it online. Story 28. Donald Sutherland was in a first-class lounge at Heathrow very early one morning before a flight back to Canada. I commented on his small dog. He was nice and gracious. I did not even let on that I knew who he was. Story 29. Rode an elevator with Dennis Rodman. After about 10 awkward seconds, I said, "So, nobody else is going to acknowledge we are in an elevator with Dennis Rodman?" He laughed but did not say anything else. Story 30. Eddie Murphy was in an elevator. I was 12 when I started doing the "you dropped your ice cream" bit. My parents were truly confused about what was going on. He then started that recognizable laugh and gave me a high five. Story 31. A long time ago, Reese Witherspoon, who was very friendly and petite, asked us if we wanted an autograph. No one had anything to sign at the time. Later, I realized that I had a pen and a magazine with her on the cover in my backpack. Story 32. Chris Christopherson. I had beers with him and his wife after shooting a music video in the bar where I worked. He was in town filming a dolphin movie. They were really nice and invited me to visit them in California. I regret never taking them up on the offer. Also Ryan Dunn. My friends and I recognized him at a strip club in Reno. The girl we were with approached him, and he joined us for a long time. He was awesome. Hayden Christensen was also there, but he kept to himself. They were racing across the country in the bull run. Story 33. I shared a blunt with Ron White before. Puff, puff, pass around the circle. When I passed it back to Ron, he dropped it on the floor, and I called him an amateur. He stared at me with a look of shock for what seemed like forever. Then he cracked up and started laughing. Good times. Story 34. Working and volunteering backstage at San Diego Comic-Con, I got to meet quite a number of famous people. However, I would say that meeting Christopher Reeve was my favorite. In 1979, there was a fundraiser in San Diego to help rebuild the Old Globe, a Shakespeare theater in Balboa Park. Our high school theater group was invited to attend. Wandering around, enjoying the sights and performers, I backed into someone. I turned around to apologize and found myself looking at the gentleman's chest. So I looked up and found myself face to face with Christopher Reeve, who had performed there in the early 1970s. I apologized as best as a high school senior and avid comic book collector could. He was gracious, and when he found out I was part of a high school theater group, he took time to speak with me and my few friends about our craft, the roles we had played, and his Shakespeare roles at the Old Globe. Eventually, his handlers moved him toward the stage for a speech. He shook our hands and went on. Story 35. I met Sir Anthony Hopkins on a train from London in 1992. He was an absolutely nice gentleman. He was happy that people did not really recognize him, and I did not make a big deal about it. He was reading a book, so I did not constantly disturb him, but we engaged in conversation quite a bit. At that time, I did not have a mobile phone or a camera, so no pictures were taken. Story 36. Interviewed William Shatner one-on-one at comic convention. I could see he was irritated by people asking him about Star Trek while we waited for the cameras to be set up. So I went a different route and asked him how he keeps himself busy. He beautifully described his love of horses and the farm he has and how he spends his time there. I also interviewed Timmy Trumpet at Ultra Music Festival. We greeted each other, and he immediately started pouring shots for my wife, his wife, and me. We just started chatting, and I asked him one question about his music. The rest of the time, we were just hanging out. He is one cool dude. Story 37. Patrick Wilson, the actor from The Conjuring, Watchmen, and Aquaman. I was his driver while he was in Hawaii for the movie Midway. One morning, around 3 or 4 a.m., I picked him up outside the hotel. He had 2 coffees. He said, "I can lie and say I got you one, but they actually messed mine up and remade it for me, so this one's for you." Another day, which confirmed him as a genuinely kind person, it was pouring rain. They were going to rehearsals at a hotel ballroom. We were in traffic, passing by stores, when a lady slipped on the sidewalk. Before I could stop, Patrick jumped out of the car, ran over to check if she was okay, and helped her up. An awesome person. Story 38. Ronald Reagan at Johnny Rockets in Beverly Hills, California. He sat next to me at the bar while his security detail was positioned at all 3 corners of the place and outside the door. He was a mellow guy and even gave me his presidential business card. Story 39. I used to work on a soundstage in Hollywood, so I met famous people almost every day. Almost all of the most famous people I met were very sweet and charming, but they were at work, so there wasn't a feeling of, is this person going to approach me? We were all working, so the atmosphere was different than when you see them in public, where they can be a little more tense. My favorite of those top-level stars was Cher. She was fun and didn't seem to be putting on any kind of act. She didn't care in a really great way that put everyone at ease. Story 40. Taylor Swift. Here is the story. I used to work at a really nice bar for a couple of years. One day, we received a message that a very important person was coming in at 6:30, and security would sit at a table nearby. We had two guesses. It was either Donald Trump or Taylor Swift. Needless to say, we were pleasantly surprised when two massive security guards rolled up and sat at a booth nearby. Then a lone blonde woman, who looked like she had just finished a shift at Olive Garden, walked in, said hi, and made her way over to the booth in the corner to sit down. I went over to her, greeted her, and started some conversation. She was incredibly sweet, kind, and receptive. She made plenty of eye contact, asked me what I would recommend, and was overall a genuine sweetheart. Two of her friends showed up and were fine, although far less nice than she was. Over the course of the evening, Taylor and her friends each had about 6 drinks. Her security tipped on top of paying the bill, and Taylor herself shook my hand with hundreds in cash that she pulled loose from her purse. I am not a fan of hers at all, but she was one of the nicest people I have ever met. I realize it is just her fans that are unpleasant. 10 out of 10. Story 41. Matthew Perry was in Australia. He was doing a photo shoot in Bondi. He asked me for a cigarette. I tried to make small talk with him, but he was very awkward. He thanked me and walked away. Definitely not the Chandler we saw on television. Story 42. Ken Dryden, Hall of Fame goalie for the Canadian team, was a client of mine for a while. I fixed his Mac. Amazing guy. He was general manager of Toronto at the time. We did not talk much about hockey but primarily about law. Turns out my childhood hero was exactly that. Story 43. Aerosmith visited the pediatric floor around Christmas at Massachusetts General Hospital during the Get a Grip tour. I only remember meeting Joe Perry. He came into my hospital room. I was 9, I think. Story 44. I had several interactions with Jeff Foxworthy at a previous job. He is exactly like he comes across on stage. Friendly, down to earth, and just overall a nice guy. He is that funny in real life. Story 45. I sat next to Norm Macdonald at a live taping of Jay Leno's Tonight Show. I got to chat with him before the show started and was on television with him when Jay Leno noticed him in the crowd. He was a very nice person. I was also in an elevator with John Goodman, who passed gas and did not say a word. He pretended I was not even there. Story 46. James Baldwin. Pizza, champagne, encouragement for writing, and an education in how the recently released film Raiders of the Lost Ark used racist tropes. 14 out of 10. Story 47. Jennifer Garner said, "I love your work," while I was installing Rift White Oak on her driveway gate. She is such a gem of a person. Story 48. Beck. I was in the Virgin Atlantic Lounge at Heathrow on a work trip. He was sitting there eating some cheese. I walked by and said, "Huh, you look like Beck Hansen." He said, "Yup," and looked down. I said, "I saw you in 1994 at a mini concert you gave at the Boot in New Orleans, a total college dive bar. It was one of the most fun concerts I've seen." He grinned and said, "That was a long time ago. I was living in my car, and my album dropped 2 weeks after that show. I didn't have to live in my car after that. Thanks for the terrific memory." He smiled, shook my hand, and gave me a wedge of cheese. Story 49. Too many to list, but the nicest were probably Simon Pegg and Kiefer Sutherland. The least nice was Carrie Elwes. Story 50. Anthony Bourdain. I waited online to buy his cookbook and get his autograph. He was very hard-looking, like he had just been put in a blender. He died 2 months later. Story 51. I played poker with Paul Pierce, sat right next to him, and talked to him most of the night. He is a funny guy and really cool. He signed autographs, made jokes all evening, and smoked enough marijuana to put most people in a coma. I have met and played with more celebrities: Irving Lorenzo, Donald Cheadle, Matthew Damon, David Schwimmer, Michael Williams, and David Harbour, but Pierce was the one I actually got to talk to. Everyone I mentioned was also very chill, but Pierce was the most outgoing. After an hour, you forget he is a former National Basketball Association champion. You just think of him as one of the friends enjoying poker. Story 52. Jason Momoa at a ski and mountain biking resort one summer several years ago. I ran into him twice in the same day and chatted a bit, only realizing who he was after a friend asked me if I knew who I had been talking to after the second time. He was very down to earth. He initiated both interactions, so I imagine I gave off the vibe that I did not know who he was, making our interactions more authentic. I assume that is quite rare for someone like him. There was none of that awkwardness with someone as clueless as myself. Story 53, O.J. Simpson. I was 11 and in the Bahamas. My uncle, cousin, and I were walking on the boardwalk, which was not like American boardwalks with attractions. This was just a big wooden walkway. There was a mime-looking clown performing magic tricks by himself. O.J. walked up to us, put his arms around our shoulders, and led us to watch the man perform a few tricks. It was just the three of us, the clown, O.J., and his two kids. Story 54. Maybe Mario Andretti. He was fantastic. He would sign anything for you, pose for photos, chat with you, you name it. He was bubbly, friendly, and youthful. This was only a few years ago. I asked him many questions, including what he would like to see happen in motorsports before he goes. One thing he wanted was to see the end of the Andretti Indy 500 curse, where no Andretti has won the race since he did back in the 1960s. This is despite many Andrettis competing in many Indy 500 races since then. So it was great to see him on television on Sunday cheering on his grandson at the big race yesterday. Unfortunately, his grandson crashed out in the first few laps. The curse lives on, and so does Mario. Story 55. Danny McBride. A friend of mine grew up with him several states away. I was with her at a music festival, and we ran into him and his sister. They sat with us for a while, and my friend caught up with the two of them. I took a selfie. He was very nice and seemed genuinely excited to catch up with an old friend. Story 56. I smoked a joint with Keith Urban when he was first becoming known. I had no idea who he was, though. It was just me, sitting alone in a park, and a buddy walked up and sat next to me. We started chatting. He was a chill guy. I had just finished rolling, so I asked if he wanted to partake. We sat together for probably an hour. He had a guitar with him but didn't play. Nice, normal guy. I met my husband a few days later and told him about Keith, the guy I had sat with, and how it had been a nice conversation. Years later, Keith Urban was on a TV show, and I realized, that's the guy. I also met Jean Chrétien, former Prime Minister of Canada. I was part of a ceremony while he was Prime Minister. It was winter, and I was outside wearing just my uniform. He shook my hand and told me I was stupid for not having a jacket on. Typical Chrétien. Story 57. Randy Savage, on 2 separate occasions, had a great sense of humor. He loved to tell stories from the wrestling business. He made everyone who took the time to talk with him feel special. He was extremely kind to me. Story 58. Julianne Moore was shopping with her daughter at Nordstrom in Dulles Mall, Virginia. I was about 19 years old and walked into the store to pick up some shoes right after I had been smoking in my car. I was very high and had just watched her movie Don John the night before on Netflix. I thought I was tripping. I was like, that's the lady from the movie last night. This is a suburban town in Virginia, about 40 minutes from Washington, D.C., so you don't really see celebrities like you do in New York or Los Angeles. You might see some politicians or people from Washington itself, but not in a suburb almost an hour away. This mall was also quite empty at this point, making it an even stranger moment. I had to ask the guy at the register if it was her or if I was imagining things. He confirmed it was her and said she shops there all the time. Apparently, she lived in Northern Virginia at one point. I didn't want to bother her since she was with family. It was a funny experience for me. She was good in that movie. Story 59-1. I was in front of the Fairmont Hotel in Santa Monica. I was texting a friend, and just as I looked up, Arnold Schwarzenegger was 6 feet away, walking towards me. He was wearing a tracksuit with a small group. I think they had been jogging or cycling. You would expect to have something smart to say at a time like that. But I just sputtered and said, "The man!" Without breaking his stride, he made eye contact and nodded as if to say, "You're right, I am." 2. I met Björk at a party in Reykjavik. My friend did not recognize her at all and had a long conversation with her. I recognized her and tried to make small talk by drunkenly asking her friend for a light. They did not like my style and mocked my American accent. I am Canadian. When she left, I was outside smoking. Another friend, who is Canadian but speaks perfect Icelandic, managed to charm her and have a little chat while I stood there trying not to mess things up for him. Then she skipped off into the Reykjavik fog, sucking on a ring pop. 3. I met Craig Ferguson once. This is niche and maybe I am revealing too much, but I was very excited to meet him because Craig Ferguson is also my name. He was very nice and gave me a lasting gift. Whenever someone comments on me having the same name as him, I say, "Oh, you mean the other guy?" and show them a picture of us together. He is holding my driver's license in the photo. I get a laugh when I say, "I'm the guy on the left." They always ask, "What did he say when you told him your name?" He said, "You must put up with a lot of stupid jokes." Story 60. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I was fortunate to have lunch with her at the Supreme Court building. She was my grandmother's mentor, and they corresponded only through handwritten letters. Story 61. Carrie Fisher. As a production assistant making the rounds in New York City, I landed a gig at a mental health symposium at Radio City Music Hall. I even got to chill in the Rockets dressing room and wander the stage and backstage. A theater kid's dream come true. Mayor Giuliani arrived with his entourage of assistants but made a point of shaking every production assistant's hand and asking our names. Nice touch. I was assigned as Ms. Fisher's liaison, assisting her on and off stage for her moving speech. I had no experience with celebrities and was not familiar with the stage and intricate curtain system, but how hard could it be? Carrie was warm, kind, and surprisingly petite. After her speech, I guided her with my flashlight, intending to chaperone her safely off stage and back to the green room. She grabbed my hand as we started walking, as she was wearing huge high heels. Somewhere we took a wrong turn and we arrived back on stage, hand in hand, right behind someone mid-speech, pretty sure Reverend Sharpton. There were chuckles from the audience. "Oh shit," I muttered, and we executed a hasty retreat, much like the Homer Simpson disappearing gif. Despite my apologies, she was incredibly gracious, repeatedly assuring me, "Don't worry, no one cares," holding my hand all the way back to her manager. Sage advice from a true original. Edited to add another story from this time period. Wyclef Jean. Another production assistant gig from that time period. I was a production assistant on an independent movie. One warm and bright sunny day, we were setting up a shot in Midtown, off-Broadway, and the traffic was backed up. A black luxury car rolled by and came to a stop. The window rolled down to reveal Wyclef Jean. I loved the Fugees and recognized him immediately. I elbowed the production assistant next to me and gestured wildly with my head toward Wyclef. When he finally saw him, we shouted, "Hey Clef!" He replied, "What are you all doing?" My friend said, "Making a movie." He nodded slowly and rolled up his window. Story 62. Probably Chris Evans and Sebastian Stan during the press tour for Captain America: Civil War. I was at BuzzFeed at the time and we did a Tumblr crowdsource question and answer session. They were lovely. The funniest part was one of the questions Evans scrolled through asked what his fursona would be. Evans was like, "What the hell is a fursona?" And Stan immediately, from across the table, looked up and loudly said, "Do not let him Google that." I delightfully got to explain to Chris Evans about furries and fursonas without letting him Google it. Evans, "Wait, is it a sex thing?" Me, no, not always. But sometimes, for some people. Stan, "Oh God." Chris, "Just stop." I also did a similar thing with Benedict Cumberbatch, and he was also nice but very clearly more straight-laced and less willing to joke around. Story 63. Vince Vaughn on the Chicago Metro. I woke up on the train after a few drinks, and he was sitting next to me. He is a giant but very polite. He asked me if I felt okay to drive, and I did. A larger-than-life stranger who genuinely cared about a stranger's well-being. Story 64. I met Jimmy Carter when he was holidaying in Scotland in the 1990s. I was 5 years old, and while my grandparents knew who he was, I had no idea. I also met Slash in an elevator in Belfast in 2019. I was there on business, full of cold. He smirked at me and strode off with his LP in a case. It only clicked after the elevator doors shut as to who he was. Story 65. Weird Al at an event promoting the Daniel Radcliffe biopic. I had a ticket for one of the upcoming shows on his tour and asked him if he would be cool signing it in advance. He was lovely guy, super gracious with everyone I saw him interact with. Story 66. I shared a wave with Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. I happened to be outside the palace as they were heading to a function in the city, so I got lucky. She was very small in real life. Story 67. Met a bunch of people at an old job. Standout jerks include Bill Maher, Kim Zolciak of The Real Housewives, and Jeff Garlin. Standout nice people were Andy Cohen, Joy Behar, and Claire Danes. Story 68. Leonard Nimoy on a city bus in New York City. He signed a playbill from Equus for my grandmother, who was a huge Star Trek fan. Story 69. I met half of the Smashing Pumpkins, including Billy. I have heard some horror stories, but I find him to be pretty pleasant. Story 70. Comedian Jim Jeffries. I could tell he did not want to hang out with us at that bar, but the other comedian who was with him was relaxed. Story 71. I worked at a radio station in Dearborn, Michigan, and Bob Seger stopped in. He was very nice. I had a big crush on him and still do. Story 72. I'm from Poland, but the only time I went to New York City, I met Steven Spielberg walking his dog. We said good morning, Mr. Spielberg, and he returned the gesture with a smile. I am not counting the many movie stars I have seen at the Toronto Film Festival. In Poland, though, maybe Dariusz Mikulski, a boxing champion. He is supposedly from Gdansk, where I live. Story 73. Sam Raimi and I were very drunk at a Tampa hotel bar very late at night. I yelled out, "I know you!" and ran right up to his table where he was sitting by himself reading a script. He was very kind and took pictures with me and my friends. Thank you, Sam Raimi. I must have been rather terrifying. Story 74. Whitney Houston. I gave her a massage at a spa where she lived in Miami. She was very quiet and nice. I think it was during her difficult days. She was very thin. It was surreal. I had to keep looking at her face thinking, I can't believe this is Whitney Houston. Story 75. Sean Penn. I ran into him in the East Village, and he was extremely friendly and polite. He answered a few questions I had for him and shook my hand. Story 76. Stockard Channing. Met her through a distant relative of the late Robert Evans. Stockard is a classy person and has no diva attitude. I will not add details due to privacy concerns, but she is probably the only A-list actress who behaves like a normal person when not on set. In my opinion, it is like a culture of nastiness where younger actors are vicious towards employees and passersby. Story 77. Sir Paul McCartney. I was staying at a hotel, not a big place but fairly large, and for some reason the lobby was extremely crowded, so I ducked into the bar, even though it was not supposed to be open. I did not know he was staying there, and he had done the same thing to avoid the press, which was why it was crowded. We had a bit of a laugh. He found a kettle behind the bar, and we made a pot of tea while we waited for the crowd to leave. Nice person. Story 78. Toby Maguire. I worked in a trendy coffee shop in Montreal more than 10 years ago, and he came for an espresso. He is very short in real life. I am a 5'6" lady and was taller than him. His handler paid and left a nice tip, about $5 on a $3 espresso. Times were cheaper then. Story 79. George Bush Sr. came to my wedding, a friend of my in-laws. He had just won a primary against Ronald Reagan. It might have been his only win. He was very warm and kind and tried to be inconspicuous. Nevertheless, I did not vote for him or Ronald Reagan. Story 80. I already mentioned my meeting with Jim Carrey and Lenny Kravitz and how that went, but my mom has a funny story. She went dancing with my dad at one of the casinos in Las Vegas when Al Pacino walked in. He danced with her most of the night. My dad was fuming with jealousy and eventually walked her back to Al Pacino. He kissed her hand like a gentleman and said, I danced with the most beautiful woman in the world tonight. Thank you for entrusting her to me. My dad, an ex-boxer, didn't know who he was and said he was about to knock him sideways if he went on one more dance with her. Al Pacino just laughed it off, then looked at my mom and said, "If he ever mistreats you, get in touch." My usually cool dad allegedly looked like an angry tomato after that comment. Story 81. I didn't meet him but Cillian Murphy when I was on my cigarette break 2 years ago. I'm from the same place he's from, and he was in town for a film festival. I just made weird eye contact with him as he walked past me on an empty side street because I was too nervous to say anything. Story 82. In 1978, Cheech and Chong were playing in a celebrity basketball game at our high school gym. I was coming out of the locker room after sixth period physical education. Cheech walked up to me and asked, "Hey, where's the cane, man?" I told him, "It went well, I think." Story 83. Leonardo DiCaprio was very rude. I was probably acting a bit awkward as well. Still, my takeaway was that he was unpleasant. Bruce Willis was a completely cool guy. He shook my hand, and I thought I was going to pass out. I was his biggest fan at the time and had traveled to the premiere of one of his movies where I knew he would make an appearance. Story 84. Taylor Swift. I was invited to one of the 1989 secret sessions in her New York home. It was really fun, and she is genuinely as nice as everyone says she is, or she is an incredibly underrated actor. Story 85. Met Kevin Brown, the actor who played .com on 30 Rock, at a party. He was so genuine and lovely. I don't remember our short conversation, but he kindly agreed to take a picture with me. Story 86. Picked up my wife at the Detroit airport. She was standing there having a conversation with Muhammad Ali and his daughter. Just totally random. Nothing like getting shooed out of the loading zone at the airport by security because you are standing in shock at the opportunity to meet the greatest. Story 87. Met a lot of football players, also known as soccer players. The most famous was David Beckham. He is an incredibly nice and polite person. He always said hello and treated everyone well. I have also heard only nice stories from others who met him. Not people in football, but for example, a man who used to work at the meat counter at the supermarket where Beckham used to shop. Story 88. Luke Wilson. When I was a sushi chef, I worked at a spot in Fort Worth, Texas that was a well-loved local spot, now closed unfortunately. I worked in the part of the bar that was in the corner next to the kitchen, so that spot was generally the most obscured from view. He came and sat down in front of me, wearing sunglasses and a hat, clearly trying to hide who he was. I just gave him a head nod and handed him a sushi menu. We chatted a bit, and eventually I had to ask, "Are you?" He responded, "I am an actor." I thought, that was a very discreet and humble way to address the situation. He really enjoyed himself. It turns out he was in town for a few months shooting a smaller film called 12 Mighty Orphans, so he would come back once or twice a week until they wrapped. He brought some other folks along with him a couple of times. King Orba, who I didn't know prior to this, but he was a very nice man, as well as Wayne Knight. It was cool to meet him too. I loved Space Jam as a kid. I think he brought Martin Sheen on my day off once. It was a while ago. Luke gave me a call sheet to give to my wife because she loved him so much in Legally Blonde. He was a really nice guy, and I'm grateful I got to know him a little. At the end of the day, my takeaway was to treat anyone the way you'd want to be treated in a situation like that. He had just gotten off a full day of working as an actor and just wanted to sit and enjoy some sushi. I like to think if I had made a big deal and asked for pictures or whatever, he wouldn't have wanted to come back. We were pals for a short time, and I just think that's neat. Hope you're doing well, Luke. Story 89. I was in a sandwich shop in Vancouver, and Liam Neeson was in town filming something. On their sign outside, they wrote, "Liam Neeson eats for free." As I was eating my sandwich, lo and behold, Liam Neeson walked in. He ordered his sandwich, made some small talk, and walked out with his sandwich without paying. Story 90. Met Shaka Khan. We were in a little lounge at the airport. She asked if she could sit with us. I did not know who she was, but she sat next to me and entertained my baby. She sang to him and talked to me about how hard being a mother is. We shared our experiences about breastfeeding. She was just lovely. Then she introduced herself and my jaw dropped. "Shaka, I love you." Story 91. Obama approached our table while we were having breakfast. My friend told him we were busy talking. Story 92. Julius Irving Hall of Fame Game, Springfield, Massachusetts. David Cowan's picture in local paper. Meadowlark Lemon. Don Nelson beat him in horse. Story 93. In the same night at the Sydney premiere of Baby Driver, I met Ansel Elgort, Lily James, brushed by Edgar Wright, and had a lengthy chat with Mad Max director George Miller. I left at the end of the night, disappointed I didn't get to meet Wright, when I noticed the person walking in the crowd next to me was George Miller, who conducted the Q&A that evening. George Miller is not only the nicest celebrity I have ever met, but one of the nicest people I have met. Period. A lot of memorable moments happened in our chat that I will carry forever. But the funniest was when I asked for a photo at the end, and he agreed enthusiastically as cinema staff approached and tried to usher him away. We both stepped onto an escalator when they pulled him off it, and he grabbed my shirt collar to help me back up as well. So here I am with George Miller effectively pulling my collar and stumbling up an escalator. He made sure I got all the time I needed to take the photo I wanted before he moved on, despite the staff getting anxious. It makes me so happy to see his films beloved across the world, especially knowing how kind the person underneath the fame is. Story 94. I shook Josh Duggar's hand at a book signing for his family book at Focus on the Family. It was before the scandal, and there was a massive line for this experience. Story 95. King Charles, who was Prince Charles at the time, visited New Zealand on his tour in 1994. I was 8 years old. He came to our school sports day where I was at the hurdle station. He asked me what it involved. I explained, first you have to run really fast, then you jump over the hurdle, go under the hurdle, jump over the hurdle again, go under the hurdle and keep going around and around until you finish. He replied, "Oh yes, jolly good. It seems to be a bit muddy." And he pointed at my knees covered in mud. I appeared on the evening news sharing this story, and when I mentioned the mud, the camera panned down to my knees. My mother and grandmother were mortified that I had met the Prince of Wales covered in mud. And even more so when I appeared on national television filthy. Story 96. I nannied for Jennifer Slate back in 2021. She was very nice and had a gorgeous home. She had snickerdoodles when I came over, and I still use her recipe. Story 97. Elton John. I used to valet at a condominium where he lived part-time in Atlanta. I worked as a waiter for a couple of parties he hosted in his condominium as well. At one of them, the guests were about 2 hours late because their bus broke down on the way, so we talked in his kitchen while we waited. He is a nice guy. The guests were an up-and-coming band named The Killers. Story 98. Anderson Cooper. I spotted his beautiful hair from a distance and saw a few people gathered around him. I walked over, and he was happily taking pictures with everyone. I wanted one as well, but as the last person to approach, I was waiting my turn. Someone before me asked me to take their photo, so I did, and then passed my phone for my picture. He didn't realize I wanted one too and waved goodbye, turning to walk away. I wasn't thinking and reached out to touch his arm to ask if I could also have a picture before he left. I have never been so close to being confronted by a security person. He was very nice about it, stopped his security guard, and turned back for a photo with no problem. He had a short chat with everyone there and wrapped his arm around each person. An incredibly lovely fellow. Story 99. I met Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes at a restaurant called Cut in Los Angeles. He and the entire crew had probably finished filming Rock of Ages since they were all there. I was sitting in a corner booth at the end of a walkway in the restaurant. Beyond the walkway on the other side was their table. They had to walk right past us, making full eye contact to get to their table. This was during the height of Tom's Scientology controversy when he had a few difficult interviews from 2006 to 2008. As they walked toward our table, Tom was fully focused on us, with that intense Top Gun stare. I wasn't sure what to expect, whether he might lose composure or give us a Scientology test. As he approached our table, he stopped, looked at all of us, then gave his $10 million smile. He asked how we were all doing, how our evening was going, and made small talk for a couple of minutes before going to his table. He said we could ask for an autograph, but we decided to let him enjoy his night. He was very pleasant, easy to talk to, and really made us feel noticed. We didn't see any of the negativity, and to this day, I think of him as one of the friendliest celebrities out there. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.